Welcome to the EEG Show, where you'll learn about the importance of EEG in the assessment of patients with various neurological conditions, and the new research findings that are defining a new path for the utilization of EEG in the current practice of medicine.
Hello, friends. My name is Kunal Sampath. I'm your host at the EEG Show. I'm also the Director of Clinical Operations at Ceribell. I'm excited to interview our guest today, Dr. John Stern. Dr. Stern is a professor of Department of Neurology, Director of Epilepsy Clinical Program, and Director of the Epilepsy Residency Training Program at UCLA. His activities encompass a range of diagnostic and treatment modalities from seizures and epilepsy. He has authored the book Atlas of EEG Patterns and served as a co-editor for the book Atlas for video EEG monitoring. I invited Dr. Stern to share with us the current state of EEG technologist staffing given the pandemic crisis. Dr. Stern, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
What changes, if any, have you seen or experienced in EEG technologist staffing during COVID-19?
We haven't changed our EEG staffing during COVID-19, and we haven't because of plans that we put into place in planning for the anticipated surge. Our staffing is 24/7 for EEG technologists, but our concern in planning for the surge and our concern still is technologist exposure to infection, or technologists being quarantined and not available in the pool of technologists for us, or not having sufficient number of technologists because of increased number of patients who require continuous EEG. So we've not changed our staffing by changing our protocols for continuous EEG and limiting technologist exposure to patients who potentially have COVID, and using the neurologist who already is engaged in care of that patient to obtain the first continuous EEG, and that's with Ceribell.
So has the usage of conventional EEG and or spot EEG increased, decreased, or stayed flat during the pandemic?
Our use of Ceribell has increased during the pandemic because of the utilization in situations where we may just go straight to a continuous EEG. The patients who require superset EEG with Ceribell will still get it, but there are situations where we will want to hold back on the use of the larger devices and use Ceribell first as a way of increasing our ability to provide continuous EEG. In other words, if the use of a large device is on a patient who is later found to have COVID, that device requires downtime for cleaning, for sanitization, that the Ceribell device is much more quickly cleaned and back up for use for another patient.
I see. Is there a concern about the EEG technologists' frequent or prolonged exposure to potentially infectious patients? And if so, how do you think hospitals are currently addressing this?
So we certainly are concerned about any staff member of the hospital being exposed to the coronavirus for their safety, and as well as the system being able to provide care for patients. And so minimizing the exposure of the EEG technologists is one of the goals for the benefits of use of the Ceribell device. We're not increasing the exposure for anyone else. We are shifting the we're decreasing the number of staff members who are seeing the patient by having the neurologist who is already seeing the patient obtain the initial EEG using Ceribell.
I see.
The Ceribell device has provided an ability to increase our EEG capacity in the hospital, and not by purchasing more equipment, but by realizing that the Ceribell device can substitute for a larger EEG machine and allow us to have a greater number of patients on continuous EEG than we did before. If the Ceribell device is only for screening, then the patients may then go on to continuous EEG or may not, and that allows for faster response. But the Ceribell device can remain in place for longer than just screening, and then allow us to have a greater number of patients being evaluated. And that was part of our concern in anticipation of the surge. However, remains a benefit of our use of the Ceribell device.
How about any non-Ceribell related strategies that you've implemented at your institution?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I'm looking at the protocol that we drafted, and it's really all about Ceribell.
Okay, I see.
And so our protocol has to do with when do we get a routine EEG and when not, because of concern of exposure.
Right.
I mean, I can share our protocol if that's helpful.
Sure.
Our protocol for continuous EEG changed in the context of the pandemic, with an interest in providing the best care for the largest number of patients, but also minimizing the risk to the hospital staff. And so we have a bifurcation in the protocol now where patients who have either tested negative for COVID or show no signs or symptoms of COVID will go through the process as usual. And that is, if a consulting team requires a continuous EEG for the patient, the EEG lab provides that as usual. But if a patient has signs or symptoms of COVID or has tested positive, and if they're showing signs and symptoms, then presumably they're being evaluated and it's unknown if they have COVID, then the primary team consults neurology. The idea is that such patients would typically warrant a neurology consultation, and the neurologist would evaluate whether that patient requires a continuous EEG, and the neurologist would provide the Ceribell device as a way of beginning the process for continuous EEG, and thereby limit the exposure of other hospital staff to a patient who potentially has COVID. The continuous EEG would continue either with Ceribell or switching over depending upon the patient's situation. But the use of this protocol has expanded our capacity because it has increased the number of available EEG units for us and decreased the downtime of units when they are offline for cleaning after use for a patient who either has COVID or potentially has COVID.
Thank you, Dr. Stern, for your time today. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the EEG Show. This podcast was brought to you by Ceribell. For more information and tips, visit our website at ceribell.com/podcast.